Minnesota Vikings going through what y'all need to know to make some money on this team in 2021. So last year, 7-9, not particularly good, but a lot of reasons to be encouraged about this upcoming season. In fact, more so than just about any team in the league, I would argue. And we're going to get into why that is. But as far as last year, what happened, you were dealing with probably the worst position group in the NFL in the Vikings defensive line last year. They, as we'll talk about their losses, they were just starting players that had no business even being on an NFL field. The Danielle Hunter injury really killed them, and it put them in a lot of situations that made the rest of their roster look a lot worse than it actually is. But again, that's encouraging. As far as my record on them, you're still making money as you are pretty much every team. 11-8-1 on strong bets. That's the important one. Not nearly as good as it could have been. This is a team where I did kind of struggle with the over-unders, especially at the end of the year. That's kind of why that's there. But still, overall, 25-17-3, we're doing all right. Should be a lot better, but we're doing all right. As far as losses go, offensively, there's really two important ones here. The main one is Riley Reiff. He's been the starting tackle for the Vikings for a couple of years, and he is absolutely worth the starts that he had. He's open to criticism for sure. He's not an elite player. He does struggle with the high end of pass rushers like Khalil Mack in his own division and stuff like that. But he consistently wins. He actually fits the scheme pretty well as far as the run block. And I think he was maybe a little bit underappreciated with the Vikings. I don't think he's amazing. And we'll talk about how they replaced him. And you can definitely do better. But having a guy who's pretty much guaranteeing you reasonable NFL play at the tackle position is really valuable. Losing him does hurt. Kyle Rudolph, the other important one. Important might be a little overstated, actually, at this point in his career. He's still pretty good. As far as a tight end 2 goes, who's more of a receiving threat than anything, he's okay. But he is at the point where you kind of ask yourself whenever he's doing something on the field, it's like, what is he really doing as opposed to other guys? The answer, by the way, is that he has maybe the best hands, some of the best hands in the NFL. Probably not the best, but he's way, way up there. And they are going to miss him a little bit, but his production is not anything insane. They lose Ben Jones, a guy who started some games on the interior, a player I actually think they should have worked harder to keep. He's a reasonable player if he's forced into duty as a backup. And then Sean Mannion, whatever, bad backup quarterback. And then just filling out the list, Ajay Sharp, he didn't even make it all the way through last year with the Vikings. But defensively, a lot more and a lot more important as far as the losses go. So those first two, I'll kind of get out of the way. Jalen Johnson, Shamar Stephen, those are the guys I referred to earlier. They are maybe two of the absolute worst defensive tackles in the entirety of the NFL who should not be playing any snaps on your team. And they were both starting next to each other last year. That is something that the Vikings did to themselves by not addressing the position over the course of years. And it was the reason their defense was bad, effectively. That, and again, the Danielle Hunter injury. Now, they're both gone, and that by itself is a lot of reason for optimism. It's going to get even better once we get to the actual defense in place now. But, yeah, those two, they lose Ifeadi Adenibo. He's a kind of whatever edge rusher. He is effectively the same as Stephen Weatherly, a guy that they lost last year. They bring him back. He is fine to be on the field for rotational snaps. It's kind of it. The important ones, though, so you lose Eric Wilson. He is okay. He put up some stats last year when he came in after the Anthony Barr injuries, when he was asked to do a lot because the Vikings linebackers, they put up stats. And he's not bad, but as a guy, as far as a difference maker goes, he's pretty comfortably replaceable. And so I'm not so worried about that. Anthony Harris, I am a lot more worried about. He was hurt, as many of the players that we're going to talk about as we go through the Vikings defense were last year, by the complete lack of pass rush, right? Because it's one thing to be asked to cover NFL level receiving threats for 4 seconds. It's another to do it for infinity, basically, which is the position the Vikings were in a lot of the time last year. And Anthony Harris, his play did suffer because of that. But something to know with that is that it wasn't really him. He was actually still pretty good. He was doing a lot of positive things. It's so hard to do anything positive over such like a 10-second period on any given play. Then you get to Jeff Gladney. I'm not going to talk about the off-field stuff. He's now cut. As a rookie, he was actually pretty damn good. So that's it's a shame as far as football goes. Mike Hughes, he was bad, effectively a first-round bust. He was never like the worst corner in the league or anything like that. And I don't think it's unreasonable to have him on a roster, but they're not going to miss him. And then Hardy Nickerson, just a bad rotational linebacker. Additions-wise, offensively, Mason Cole is a bad backup lineman. He does fit their scheme very well. They traded like a 5th-round pick, I think, for him, and that is understandable given the way that he interacts. He's one of these like undersized, fast guys that plays in the interior. Now he just happens to be bad and completely lacks NFL play strength. Then D.D. Westbrook, late signing, just happened recently, and he matters. So he's not my favorite receiver. He actually reminds me a lot of Anthony Miller, the receiver that the Bears just traded to the Texans, in that they both do the same NFL level skill at like a really, really high rate, which is creating separation. They're both like particularly good at it. Their problem comes in that they are so bad with any instance of physicality that it can tank a lot of the good work that they do. D.D. Westbrook, he will like perform at times as the wide receiver 3 in this offense. He's going to be able to work with one-on-one matchups and do well. But just keep that in mind that his production, while probably going to be pretty good, it's arguable about how super useful he is. But he's a decent player. Defensively, a whole lot more to talk about and a lot more fun. Boy, did they kill this shit defensively. So you bring in Patrick Peterson, Bashad Breeland, Mackenzie Alexander at corner. All guys who are very good. Patrick Peterson, not the elite corner that he has been for a long time, certainly, and will struggle at this point in his career, like with real elite receivers. Like if you ask him to cover one-on-one Stephon Diggs, Devontae Adams, he's going to get smoked. But good thing is Vikings don't necessarily do that with their corners. We'll talk about more of that later, but really good player there. Bashad Breeland, a guy who's literally proven that he can be a competent starter on a good defense like every time or every year of his career. And Mackenzie Alexander, he was hurt a lot of last year on the Bengals. People maybe forgot about him, but even when he was on the Vikings and he was kind of rotating in and out, he was pretty like all right as a nickel corner. So that's good. You also bring in a defensive tackle, Dalvin Tomlinson and Sheldon Richardson. So you go from, again, the maybe worst position group in the entirety of the NFL to one that is clearly a strength alongside the re-addition of Michael Pierce. He's opted out last year. And it can make a world of difference. Again, you bring in Stephen Weatherly, reasonable rotational end. Xavier Woods, a guy who, similar to how I mentioned that Anthony Harris, the Vikings safety, was hurt by what was happening with their defense. Xavier Woods was potentially hurt by what was happening around the rest of the Cowboys defense the last couple of years and how bad they were. Now, he contributed more to that, certainly, and I'm a little bit worried about him, but still, he's a player who is talented, and we'll talk more about later. And then Nick Vigil, I'm not a fan of him at all. He's an okay special teams player. He should not be playing defensive snaps on your team if you're trying to be good. Rookies, we'll talk about rookies and how good they are once they actually play in the NFL. Until then, I'm not too concerned about it because I don't think it's good to make preconceived notions going into a year. Ain't no point in it, and you'll find out real quick if they can play or not. But this is the Vikings draft class. So then we get to the position by position. Starting at quarterback, you see the number in the top right. That's the total number of that position that I have ranked. And the number next to the name is where that player ranks out of the total. So Kirk Cousins, the 13th quarterback out of 71. And Kirk Cousins is good. He consistently, in clean pockets, makes very good decisions, puts the ball into really good situations down the field, pushes the ball down the field again when he has time, and is able to hit a lot of throws that, frankly, not many other quarterbacks in the NFL can. Now, he happens to be one of the most unique quarterbacks in the NFL as well, and that his strengths and weaknesses are so clearly defined, and it's so obvious when he's going to be bad that it makes betting on the Vikings a lot easier, or betting with the Vikings a lot easier. What it is, right? And it's a trade he shares. Now, he's infinitely better than this player, but it's a trade he shares with Jimmy Garoppolo, and that they're some of the most unique. Like, it's obvious, again, very obvious what they are doing and how it's good and bad. And for Kirk Cousins, what that trait is, right, is his brain turns off at any sign of interior pressure, which is why you've seen them routinely struggle with a team like the Vikings have routinely struggled with a team like the Bears, who've been have this dominant interior. And it's still an issue, in the present. The Vikings they've addressed it, but they haven't fixed it yet. And that's something to keep in mind when you're talking about this team, that they do still have, in effect, a kryptonite offensively, and it's because of how Kirk Cousins just can't even function if there's pressure in his face. Again, he's not perfect otherwise, but I actually think he's way, way, way closer to guys like Matt Ryan and Matt Stafford, and that like next. He's not like Russell Wilson or anything, but he's way closer to that next tier of guys than he's given credit for. Past him, a bunch of guys. I believe Case Cookis was actually cut today, but a bunch of guys who have not played NFL snaps. You don't want playing NFL snaps likely, and then Kellen Mond, a rookie who, again, I don't really want to speak to too much. So we get to running backs. And something I always talk about with running backs is that there are only 2, 3, 4 that really matter in the NFL, or 3, 4, 5 maybe. And this is the first one in this series that we actually get to talk about. Dalvin Cook. Very comfortably, he's effectively tied with Christian McCaffrey for the best running back in the NFL. He's just a little bit worse as like a down the field receiver. But I'm not going to spend barely any time as negatives because they don't really exist. Why does he matter when other running backs don't, right? So there are 2 ways a running back can matter. I talk about this a lot. It's either that you can turn drives into touchdowns. Think when you're giving, not just goal line carries, but carries in and around, the 20-yard line in the red zone are consistently making guys miss in ways that lead to touchdowns. That is not a common skill. Every running back is capable of that, but you can clearly see when somebody's doing it at a fairly consistent basis. Dalvin Cook does that better than anyone, almost. Or you can turn plays into touchdowns. And that's the whole idea of like 70-yard touchdowns. That's the Saquon Barkley highlight. That's all that stuff. Dalvin Cook also does that at the same level as anyone else in the NFL. That's maybe except for Saquon Barkley, who has his own unique problems. So yeah, you're talking about a player in Dalvin Cook who is constantly, literally every play, creating yardage for your team, not just in short stints, not just 1 or 2 yards, creating 10, 15 yards, like on an almost drive-by-drive basis. And while he does play in a good scheme, absolutely, he legitimately, and is very clear to see, makes a big, big, big difference and does things that other running backs just cannot do. And he is a player, while normally I effectively ignore the position when I'm doing my previews for games, he is one of the ones who changes that, and it's very, very obvious why. Past him, you get Alexander Madison. He's okay. He's definitely not one of those guys who matters. He's just kind of too slow. He is, however, in this real big middle class of running backs where if you give them 20 carries a game, you are completely fine. You're not missing out. The marginal cost here, because he's behind Dalvin Cook, is big, but that's not a reasonable expectation. If he was on any other team, he would be a guy you're more than comfortable giving a bunch of carries, and you're going to do just fine with him. Again, him specifically, he does create yards at a pretty decent basis, and actually does occasionally some things that are eerily similar to Dalvin Cook, but he just does not have the same long speed or the same like quick explosiveness. Still good though. Amir Abdullah, he's whatever as a third down like pass catching, really just a special teams player. Probably not someone you really want offensively, but he's not bad enough at the running back position for me to care probably. And then some rookies. Wide receiver. So here, and this is going to be a common theme with the Vikings, we're going to have some real, real, real good players at the top. Adam Thielen and Justin Jefferson are both borderline elite receivers. The only reason that they're down where they are is Adam Thielen at this point in his career is just a little bit slow as compared to the guys ahead of him. And Justin Jefferson, frankly, could very easily argue to be in the top 10 even. It is a smaller sample size, and he is just a little bit, I think, less explosive as compared to some of the guys ahead of him. But it's very, very small margins. The point is their positives are super good. They are both the exact type of receivers that consistently win in the modern NFL and provide your offense such a gigantic baseline of production that you just end up killing people, right? Because Adam Thielen is a player who consistently wins against all types of coverage, understands coverage implicitly and finds space, tracks the ball exceedingly well, plays the ball exceedingly well in the air, has really strong hands. He does have some occasional weird drop issues, but the dude is really, really, really good. So no shade to him at all. And then Justin Jefferson, you have the same player basically, but he's also kind of good after the catch, and he's faster. And he maybe even beats people worse in man coverage. The dude is a monster. He is going to create separation effectively his whole NFL career and be an absolute animal. And I'm very, very comfortable in saying that. And by this time next year, if he's in the top even 5, I literally, maybe he's already there. So, yeah, really, really, really good. Past them, D.D. Westbrook, I talked about him earlier. And again, I will reiterate that as the third receiver, I would expect him to be productive on this team. There are guys I would rather have in that role, certainly. But he's someone who's going to beat, especially some nickel corners, comfortably from the slot. And he actually can be okay after the catch at times. And he's going to be a useful player for them is the point. Past those three, I get a whole lot more worried. You get guys like Dan Chisena or whatever, KJ Osborne, who are basically just special teams players, and then a bunch of rookies, none of whom are high draft picks or are given really any particular reason to be excited about. Chad Beebe, player I do not think is good at all. If he's the one taking snaps at receiver for your team, you're going to have issues just as far as what you're missing in any given replacement. And then the one guy I would be excited about, old BC Johnson, he just tore his ACL, unfortunately, so he'll be out for the year. Oh, we'll throw him a quick shout out, though. I actually think he's a guy who's right around in the same tier as D.D. Westbrook, who can create separation. Actually, when he's on the field, he was kind of underused last year. Does like positive things on a pretty frequent basis. Then we talk about tight ends. And now I get to talk about Irv Smith Jr., which I will always be hyped to because Irv Smith Jr. is an absolute monster. I'm very comfortable. You see, I already have him ranked in 6th as far as tight ends go in the NFL. I'm very, very comfortable with that. If you watch what he does, like in-game, he is always almost doing something very positive. As a receiver, he is right up there with everybody who's not like Travis Kelce, basically, as far as, gaining separation in routes, as far as like reading defense. Well, maybe that part he's a little bit behind on, but as far as like running after the catch, as far as beating guys in man coverage, he's so good. He's very similar to another player I very much like in Gerald Everett in that way. Two guys who have both been underused a lot as a tight end too in their career. But yeah, he does that very well. He's clearly starting to understand defenses and being able to find space. He has strong hands at the catch point. Again, he's good after the catch. And as a blocker too, he's one of these guys. So George Kittle is so far and away the best blocker in the NFL that there's not even a point in comparing him. But the next tier, Irv Smith is right there. He is outstanding as a blocker in space. He fits this offense perfectly. I cannot say enough good things about Irv Smith Jr. His production just a little bit behind because he's been in an offense that's been very run first, and he's shared the field with a bunch of other good weapons as well as being the tight end 2 on his own team. Dude's nuts, though. Past him, it does get tougher. They have suffered some depth loss in this area. Tyler Conklin, probably the tight end 2 going for the year, and whatever. He doesn't really add anything. He doesn't suck. You're not screwed if he's on the field, but not somebody who's adding something to your offense. C.J. Ham, one of the best fullbacks in the NFL for sure, but is just a fullback, and it's not like is his production really irreplaceable? No. And then guys who are either rookies or have not played snaps in the NFL. Offensive line. So this is the one position, as has been the story for years. Vikings fans are very comfortable, I'm sure, in their knowledge of that. But this is the one position where I'm not quite as excited to talk about, literally on the whole team. It is very intriguing, though, and it is exceedingly important. So maybe I am excited to talk about it. We'll start with the starters, or the tackles, at least. You're looking at Christian Darrisaw, first-round rookie, and Brian O'Neill. So Christian Darrisaw is a rookie. And with rookie tackles, you are almost universally going to get some struggles in the first few weeks at the very least. There are exceptions, and actually a very notable one that has some parallels with this is Jedrick Wills on the Browns last year, who stepped in right into a very run-heavy scheme and played very, very well. And that is something that I'm not expecting from Christian Darrisaw, but there's just enough parallels there for me to be curious if that's going to be the case, because he's going to be getting positive situations. But that is not likely, and as a pass protector, I can pretty much guarantee you, no matter how good he is, he's going to have mental mistakes as a rookie. Brian O'Neill, though, he's an animal. So good. Almost borderline perfect in pass protection outside of a little bit of some struggles with like true power rushers. Again, kind of think Khalil Mack in the same division. But even then, he's not like bad about it. He just has a little bit of a propensity to be pushed back in the pocket some. But still, yeah, really good. And as far as a run blocker go, it fits the scheme perfectly, gets out in space exceedingly well, and is just part of the reason a big part of the reason why this run offense is so good and will continue to be so good. Past them, you really start to run out of depth. Rashad Hill, he's been in their system for a long time. He's played a few games and not been completely awful, but he's not someone who was starting. Oli Udoh, we'll see. There's talk about him starting at guard too. I mean, he hasn't really played snaps in the NFL, so I don't want to make real judgments, but I'm not excited about that. Then Blake Brandel and Evan, maybe Kaiser, or however you want to say that. Not guys that are relevant. At guard, you have Ezra Cleveland. Ezra Cleveland is actually okay. This is the way I was like. He did enough encouraging things for me to be fairly comfortable with him going in as a starter going into year 2 of his career. He still has struggles for sure, especially as a pass protector, which does worry me, but he wasn't like nearly the level of disaster the Vikings have faced at the guard position for years and that was already as a rookie. So you do not assume, but you can hope for some improvement there. And even if he doesn't improve, actually, frankly, I think he's still going to be a useful player. He run blocks very well. He, again, fits their system. This team, listen, you can talk about the talent they get on their offensive line, but as far as scheme fit, they're on it. And yeah, he's going to be a useful player. I'm very comfortable with that, especially if they keep him in guard. Drafted as a tackle, of course. Then, their other spot, that part gets a lot shadier. So as of right now, potentially you're looking at Dakota Dozier starting again. I'm going to fight back a little bit on this idea the Vikings fans have that he's like literally the worst offensive lineman that's ever played in the NFL. I very much disagree with that. I don't think he's good at all. But, and this scheme, because of how good it is, does protect the guards from being able to suck that much. But as a player, I mean, he's like kind of functional as a run blocker, I got to say, at least in some certain scenarios. And as a pass protector, well, he's definitely not good. He wasn't like end of the world type stuff the way that a player like Austin Blythe was for the Rams 2 years ago, or Brian Allen. Like, there's definitely been worse recently in the NFL. Not to say he's good, though. He's not a player. You definitely don't want him starting, but that's just if he does. I don't think if the rest of their situation is still really good, that's as big of a deal as he comes out to be. And they have Wyatt Davis, a highly thought of rookie. He didn't end up getting that highly drafted, but a player that a lot of people like. And while he's a rookie, I don't want to put too much weight on him. There's a chance there, at least. Drew Samia, he's a lot closer to the idea of the worst offensive lineman that's ever played. I still don't think he was quite that bad. I thought he moved decently in space and did some things there, but he's definitely not good. Very, very far away from a player you want starting at this point, and he shouldn't be. At center, Garrett Bradbury, first round pick from a couple of years ago, who has not really ended up being particularly good at all. He does, again, fit the system very well. He moves out in space, like, very well, and he can do things that other players aren't necessarily capable of doing. Problem is, he does all that without real functional NFL play strength a lot of times, and that just limits how useful he can be, right? He's Jason. Well, listen, Jason Kelce is very, very, very good. So I think maybe that's a little too strong. More like a younger Alex Mack when on the Falcons, a player who moved pretty decently in space, but wasn't super strong. He's like that, but like 60% as good, which is not ideal. Again, he does fit this scheme okay, and I'm not like. At this point in his career, I actually think there's a pretty decent chance he plays fine this year, but not someone I'm excited about. Mason Cole, I already talked about. I think he's very bad. He does not have NFL play strength at all. He gets just destroyed into the quarterback, and that is a combination with Kirk Cousins that should not exist. Please don't play Mason Cole. But we'll see if they have a choice or not. So as offense as a whole, though, I mean, truth be told, Red Almonds is going to be really good again, right? Because you're outside of that one situation with the kryptonite of like a dominant defensive interior, you're talking about a team with at least one, but very likely two good run blocking tackles with a great, like proven run scheme and a great running back. And you have a quarterback who functions very well when he's not the main focus, throwing to elite with some of the best weapons in the entire NFL between Thielen, Jefferson, Irv Smith, and even Dalvin Cook as a receiver. And so, yeah, this team is almost matchup proof outside of that one specific thing. They have ways to beat nearly every coverage and every team in the NFL. Offensively, yeah, just like they have been for years, despite being a run-first team, they've still been very productive. That's still going to be the case here, if not even better. It kind of depends on how the offensive line comes along, because what's different here is at least there's a little bit of hope compared to the past years that it gets better. But yeah, their offense is going to be outstanding. And we get to talk about their defense. Super excited to talk about their defense as well, because you get to look at why their defense was so fucking bad last year and why I'm very comfortable saying they're going to turn things around almost instantly going into this year, right? So you go at this interior defensive line position, what we're looking at here. You go from, as I mentioned multiple times, the two of literally the worst interior defensive linemen in the entire NFL, guys who should not be playing snaps on the team, starting next to each other. You go from that to one of the toughest, biggest, stoutest interiors as far as starters go in the NFL. That is such a wild difference that it's going to show up so clearly when they play. The individuals, Dalvin Tomlinson coming over from the Giants, he's not just a fat guy. He actually makes plays in the backfield. He knows how to throw linemen in ways that disrupt the offense. He actually, even as a pass rusher, can do like a little bit. He's a very, very, very good player overall. You get Michael Pierce back from the opt-out. He is a lot closer to kind of just a fat guy, but he makes that skill set very useful as opposed to being a more passive guy who's just in the way. He's still doing that, but he's more actively controlling offensive linemen, playing gaps better. He's a pretty good player. And as depth, you bring in Sheldon Richardson. Sheldon Richardson is a player I don't love as far as a full-time every down player the way that he was in the Browns last year, but as a rotational interior rusher, are you kidding me? I don't know if there's a better player like that around the NFL who doesn't have to start. And he contrasts what they have and the other two guys very, very well. Sheldon Richardson is a great addition to his team. He will kill people for sure. Past those three, I will say it gets much worse pretty quick. James Lynch played, I think, 1 or 2 games and was not good last year. Jondae Johnson, Jordan Scott, both rookies. They're undoubted rookies. And then Armon Watts, he's the one player I will say I think has a chance. He did at least, I think he was the best interior player on the Vikings last year. Not that that's saying much. He at least has a chance to be on the field and justify it, I guess. But yeah, the top end, very good here. Then we get to edge play. Again, Danielle Hunter is wildly good. I think he gets very underrated, to be honest with you, because don't get it twisted. When this dude's healthy, he is in the tip-top elite tier of edge rushers in the NFL. He is unbelievably good as a pass rusher. He wins almost as quick as anybody does. I'm talking to Bosa's, I'm talking to TJ Watt, I'm talking to Myles Garrett. He wins just as quick as any of them. He does it with a similar level of consistency. He is an absolute monster who can beat even the best tackles in the NFL. And as a run defender, he's dominant too. He consistently gets in the backfield. He plays the edge with so much strength. Dude is wildly good. Now, he is coming off of a major, weird, neck injury. But some will say, I kind of mentioned this with injuries a lot of times, is that modern NFL players, I think, come back from injuries regularly just as good, if not better than they were before. And at this point, until seen otherwise, I'm normally not going to be too worried about it. Now, obviously, if he comes out and he sucks, I'll re-examine that opinion. But I think it's pretty safe to say, or at least go with for now, there's a real chance that he comes back just as good, very comfortably, and is very, very good. The other edge spot, definitely more concerning, but the Vikings have enough numbers here in terms of guys who might be good that they're probably going to get reasonable play. So you have Jalen Holmes. He's a run defense only guy who started games from last year. That should not be happening. I even listed right now as a starter just because I don't know who else it would be, but he should absolutely not be starting. Oh my God. But he does function kind of okay as a run defender. DJ Wonham, a rookie last year, who I'm not quite that excited about as some Vikings fans are. He does try hard for sure, and I do think there's a chance he's reasonably good, but I don't think that much of the pressure that he ended up accumulating last year was really anything more than just him really, really trying hard, which again is valuable, but it's not the same type of skill set that you really want. Stephen Weatherly, they bring back from a year away on the Panthers. He is actually probably going to start opposite Hunter. He's reasonable. He plays the run pretty well. He's literally on this team, functioned as a decent secondary pass rusher. Hercules Mataafa, maybe ranked a little bit low there. I actually thought he did really nice things when they did give him a chance last year. Granted, that was pretty few and far between, but he did place him at big edge and he came through with some actual pass rushing moves. So he's somebody to watch. And then they have 2 rookies in Patrick Jones and Janarius Robinson, 3rd and 4th round picks. And the point is, between those 6 guys, they're probably going to get someone who can play, which is encouraging. And linebacker, another spot that's super elite at the top. Eric Kendricks is absolutely amazing. He's as close to Bobby Wagner and Fred Warner as you're going to get. He's just a little bit worse in run defense, especially between the tackles, hence why he's 3rd. But it's a very slim margin. The dude is dominant, especially as a middle of the field pass defender. And he really, really, really matters. He's amazing. Anthony Barr, injured almost all last year. While I do think that he struggles with some things, obviously, you got to remember that he gets asked to do things that he just shouldn't get asked to do, and it makes him look worse than he is. Famously, an example of that is trying to man cover Cooper Kupp when the Vikings played the Rams a couple of years ago. Things like that just happen way too often, and they probably still will. But when he's not being asked to do that type of stuff, he is a playmaking linebacker who defends the run pretty damn well, and actually is a pretty smart pass defender. Now, athletically, especially laterally, he's a little bit limited, but he's a very, very useful player. Very clearly worth starting, so keep that in mind. And the 3rd linebacker spot, maybe the least important on the entirety of the defense, I don't think they're screwed there either. They don't have a clear guy who's going to start, but between Troy Dye, a rookie who I actually thought played okay in his very limited stats last year, between him, Chaz Surratt, a 3rd or 4th round rookie this last year, Ryan Connolly, Nick Vigil, neither of them I like very much, but if you're like they're your 3rd linebacker, I don't think it's impossible that they don't suck. It's another spot where I think they're going to find some okay play, and if that guy's even on the field. So we talk about corner, and something to keep in mind with the Vikings with the corners. They do not put nearly the amount of stress on this position that other teams do. They don't really play a lot of man coverage. They play a lot of like quarter zone, and they ask their safeties and linebackers to do a lot. Now, that has its own benefits and negatives, but it does allow them to employ non-elite corners and still get like kind of elite play. Not to say that their corner room is lacking talent. Actually, as we're about to get into, I think they're pretty damn good. So you have Cam Dantzler, who is ranked 40th, but it could argue for being a whole lot higher than that. Problem is, as I mentioned with players earlier on the defense, last year he was just being asked to do fucking impossible things and cover guys for 20 seconds. Obviously, that's a bit of exaggeration, but like cover guys for 8 seconds to play, and no matter how good you are, it's impossible. And so that hurt him overall. But when stupid stuff like that wasn't happening, the guy was very good. And very notably, I would argue that he covered Devontae Adams, who is comfortably the best receiver in the NFL, better than almost any other matchup did the entirety of the year. I think better than anyone else did. And that was like starting in his first game as a rookie or second game as a rookie against the Packers. So I do think there's a real chance Cam Dantzler ends up being a kind of elite guy. Patrick Peterson, he comes over. Like I said earlier, I do think he would struggle to cover guys like Robert Woods or Stephon Diggs. I can guarantee you he would. But in this scheme where he's just asked to be more of a read and react guy and use his brain, I think he'd be pretty damn good. He's still a really smart player, and it's not like he's like toast athletically. So you, as a starting pair, at least in this defense, you're getting somewhere. And past that, they actually have good depth too. So even if somebody goes down or if one of those guys sucks for whatever reason, I think Harrison Hand, as a rookie last year, actually stepped in and played pretty well. I mentioned before, Bashad Breeland has literally proven every year of his career that he can be a starter on a competent defense. So that's at your floor. And then Chris Boyd even, I actually think, got underrated for the same reason Cam Dantzler did, where he was just being asked to do fucking impossible things. And when he's in a functional defense, I think he would look a lot better. He has looked a lot better. You've been able to see him be on the field and be okay before. So that's a bunch of good corners that are going to be able to play very likely. In the slot, a lot less deep, but Mackenzie Alexander at the top, I talked about him before as well. I actually think he's pretty underrated. He does a pretty good job. He understands this defense very well, and he's definitely not going to be the reason they suck. And sometimes, that's all you need if the rest of your position can be so good, which, as we get into again, Harrison Smith, second best safety in the NFL. He suffered from the same thing of being in a fucking horrible situation last year, but he clearly was still doing positive things on a play-to-play basis. He's incredibly smart. He plays the run like pretty damn well. He knows where to be on the field. I don't think he's lost too many steps athletically, maybe a little bit. He is kind of 30, 31 or whatever now, but he's still going to be outstanding this year at the very least. I'm not worried about that at all. And with the defense that's surrounding him, I think you're going to see him even be able to be better as far as taking liberties in what he wants to do to disrupt the offense. And opposite him, Xavier Woods, again, he's probably the player I'm least excited about as far as a starter on this team. But he's shown with the Cowboys at times that he can be like a middle of the road deep safety, which is really all they need. And there are like at least slight reasons to be optimistic that he can step in and not suck. No depth beyond them, which is a pain, but defense as a whole, I mean, you got to look at this defense, right? And you ask yourself, well, how do they get beat like consistently? And the answer is there's not really a way. Now I will say if Danielle Hunter or Eric Kendricks or Harrison Smith gets hurt, you're going to throw a lot of this stuff out the window because they're going to get a lot worse really quickly. But if those three are healthy, I mean, really good pass rush, really strong defensive line, really good linebackers, good corners, really good safety, who are coached by a really good defensive coach and Mike Zimmer and play a smart, modern defensive scheme. Like they're going to be really, really, really good. And there's not a lot of clear weaknesses to attack this side of the ball. So looking ahead at their schedule, I mean, they start off pretty damn easy, man. So with this, so offensively, right, what are you looking at for concerns? Like I said, it's dominant defensive interiors and or how good or bad are the opposing linebackers. That's something that's important to keep in mind with these stretch zone teams like the Vikings, like the 49ers, like the Rams, is that they really put a lot of stress on the opposing linebackers. And if those guys can handle it, that's one thing. If they can't, it gets ugly. And in the first section of the season, I mean, they play the Bengals, who have maybe the worst starting linebackers in the NFL. They have the Cardinals, I've already told Jordan Hicks for some inexplicable reason, he's not going to be starting. So they're guaranteeing a rookie Zaven Collins in his second game and a not comfortable as an inside stand-up linebacker Isaiah Simmons. And they're asking them to beat the Vikings offense. That's just not going to happen. It's possible, but it's pretty unlikely because as good as Zaven Collins might be, the likelihood of him being at that level in his second game, we'll see about that. Seahawks do have Bobby Wagner for sure, but they don't have KJ Wright anymore. And on the defensive fronts, like the actual down lineman, the interior is kind of bad for them and very not deep. So still kind of a positive matchup. The Browns, Anthony Walker has a knee injury. Their other linebackers aren't particularly good. The Lions do have Jamie Collins, but their defense is very slow laterally, it looks like. And that's going to be an issue. And the Panthers have real bad linebackers too. Like they start off really, really, really positive. And the only team you're even remotely worried about, like I said, defensively is maybe the Browns. But even then, they match up poorly with the Vikings. It does get tougher later in the season. The Ravens are a big concern. 49ers, Steelers for sure, and the Bears has always been because of their defensive interiors. But this is a team that look at like they're set up to be really good, and their schedule even contributes to further to that. So, yeah, look out. The Vikings they're gonna smoke a lot of people this year. They're gonna be really good.